Go ahead.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for being here today. I'm Lucas Chamberlain, and this is my partner.
Emma Sedehi.
And today we'll be discussing two interconnected forces that shape the modern world: globalization and inequality. We often hear about these terms separately, but their relationship is crucial to understanding international relations and economics today. We'll define each term, examine real world examples, and explore how globalization and inequality are deeply interconnected, not just economically, but also in terms on their everyday impact in people's lives. Firstly, let's begin by defining them. According to our lecture, globalization refers to the expansion and intensification of social relations across the world, both in time and space. It encompasses activities such as trade, migration, and communication, spanning the globe. It also intensifies our interdependence, as evident in the growing interconnection of the prices of goods, migration patterns, and money flows. This means that all kinds of activities, including trade, migration, information, and money, now move faster and farther than ever before. Because globalization has intensified our interdependence, for example, the price of goods in one country can fluctuate based on supply chains that span across the globe. A decision in one part of the globe can ripple instantly everywhere else.
Thank you, Lucas, for that definition on globalization. I'm going to start by defining inequality. As defined in our lecture, inequality is the unequal distribution of power, resources, and opportunity among certain groups of people. It manifests itself in forms such as unequal trade, labor exploitation, and broader wealth disparities. It's not just an economic issue, which it's commonly thought to be, but it also affects access to health, education, and concerns human rights a lot of the time.
Some real world examples of both globalization and inequality include multinational corporations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, of which we will dive into. Globalization has created significant issues that continue to drive inequality. For instance, multinational corporations, MNCs for short, have utilized globalization to maximize profits. Between 2002 and 2007, oh, this is all according to the lecture. Between 2002 and 2007, multinational corporations have significantly increased their offshoring from 1.3 billion to $300 billion, relocating operations to countries such as China and Vietnam, where labor is cheaper and regulations are less stringent. However, when workers in these countries began organizing for better work conditions, companies simply relocated, finding even cheaper, even less organized labor elsewhere. As Professor Samuel stated, this creates a vicious cycle wherein wealth remains concentrated in developed countries while poorer countries are exploited and stay poor. This dynamic is not new, and it mirrors the patterns that we saw during colonialism, a form of neo-colonialism, when European powers extracted resources and labor from colonized lands without fair return.
Yes. And another example is the role of the international institutions, such as the International Money Fund, also known as the IMF, and the World Bank. These organizations, under what's often called the Washington Consensus, as stated in the lecture, promoted trade, liberalization, privatization, cuts of social programs, and austerity measures. Professor Samuels does talk a little bit about an austerity belt, and no, that's important. I wanted to also add on that while intended to stabilize economies, these measures often devastated poorer countries, as Lucas had stated earlier. A lot of these measures shrunk the economies, reduced their wages, and weakened social safety nets. Meanwhile, wealthy individuals and corporations, a lot from the multinational international corporations, easily were able to move their money offshore, avoiding taxes and further draining public resources from already struggling nations. Then, again, as Professor Samuels also mentions in the lecture, she says a country's social safety net was weakened completely because the government has less tax money to help them out.
To further the discussion of globalization and inequality, let's discuss its interplay. When we examine globalization and inequality together, it becomes clear that they are intertwined. Globalization has theoretically made the world smaller and more interconnected, but it has also amplified existing inequalities. On the African continent, for example, the average life expectancy at birth is just 58 years. People in Africa are 10 times more likely to die of HIV and AIDS than in Europe, and access to healthcare remains staggeringly unequal, with Africa having only 1/10 the number of physicians per capita as compared to Europe. Globally, over 1 billion people lack access to basic sanitation, and 695 million of those live in sub Saharan Africa alone. These aren't just numbers, and they reflect how globalization, if left unchecked, deepens human suffering and hinders genuine development.
Yes. And thank you to Lucas and Professor Samuels for helping us out with that one. And moving on to how we take in all of this information, how can we synthesize this and apply it from this point forward? So one way to understand this is better by examining the company Nestle. Nestle is a major multinational corporation. It's been implicated in multiple human rights violations, from forced labor in its seafood supply chain to aiding and abetting child slavery in its cacao production in the Ivory Coast. Because these abuses occur in developing countries, powerful states have a limited ability, or in some cases, a limited will to intervene. What do I mean by limited will? Well, if you're making billions and billions of dollars by keeping this company in your country, you wouldn't really want to intervene, even if it is at the expense of certain people. And this is a part of a broader trend known as neocolonialism, which Lucas mentioned earlier and Professor Samuels also mentioned in the lecture. MNCs and governments from developed nations engaged with developing countries in ways that echo the colonial past, extracting resources, exploiting labor, and maintaining economic control, just as many early Europeans did when they immigrated to the West, to the Americas, and took from indigenous lands. Weak international regulations and stagnant domestic legislators allows this exploitation to continue unchecked. And the more it's continued unchecked, the more inequality spurs, even though it was attempted to come from something good like globalization.
Now, even institutions like the World Bank and the World Trade Organization, which were created under globalization efforts, have contributed to the widening gap between the rich and poor. Instead of promoting equitable development, they often advance policies that disproportionately benefit wealthy nations and multinational corporations. This ties back in to the concept of neocolonialism, as these institutions were in majority implemented by already developed nations. Furthermore, their lackluster ability to intervene or lackluster intervention is indicative of their vested interest in the continuance of this exploitation. As Emma said, there's a lot of money to be made in this. With that being said, I'd like to pause and open the floor for any quick questions for the class before we wrap up.
Yep. Make sure to leave them down below, guys. Thank you. But thank you to Lucas for that. And in conclusion, we really appreciate you guys sitting here with us today and taking a listen to us teaching you on globalization and inequality, and how you can see that these two very different yet very interconnected concepts tie in to not only our lives, but the rest of the world. And how through their definitions, through some examples that Professor Samuels allowed us to explain, and through our own examples, we can see the exploration of how inequality has spurred from globalization, especially through the World Bank, IMF, MNCs, through all of that, where we are able to see what happened, what came of it, and we appreciate you guys listening to us. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your guys' day, class. Thank you.